ZYX had served aboard the Galactic Council's observation vessels for over 3 decades, documenting the rise and fall of countless species across the galaxy. The Velthari observer had witnessed civilizations bloom into spacefaring empires and others crumble under their own ambitions. But nothing in his extensive career had prepared him for what he would observe in the Sol system. The assignment seemed routine enough. A newly discovered species called humans had just achieved faster-than-light travel through some primitive fusion drive system. The Council needed a comprehensive report on their technological capabilities, social structures, and potential threat assessment. Standard procedure for any species that managed to break free from their home system. ZYX positioned his cloaked research vessel at the edge of the asteroid belt, well within scanning range, but invisible to the humans' crude detection systems. His initial observations were underwhelming. The humans had established a few colonies on nearby planets and moons, nothing impressive by galactic standards. Their ships were bulky, inefficient, and relied on what appeared to be nuclear propulsion systems that the galaxy had abandoned millennia ago. Fascinating, primitive creatures, he recorded in his daily log. They appear to have achieved space travel through brute force rather than elegant engineering. Their vessels are essentially flying bombs held together by metal plating and stubborn determination. The human homeworld, Earth, buzzed with activity. Massive industrial complexes dotted the continents, and their orbital infrastructure was expanding rapidly. What caught ZYX's attention was not their technology, but their behavior. Unlike most species that became cautious and diplomatic upon reaching the stars, humans seemed to approach space with the same aggressive curiosity they applied to everything else. They established mining operations on asteroids with reckless abandon, sending crews into dangerous sectors that seasoned spacefaring races would avoid. Their colonization efforts were equally bold, terraforming hostile worlds that other species would simply abandon. It was impressive in its own crude way, but hardly threatening to the established galactic order. That changed 3 months into ZYX's observation period. A Krextai raiding fleet consisting of 12 heavy cruisers and over 30 smaller vessels entered the Sol system. The Krextai were known throughout the galaxy as ruthless slavers and pirates, preying on developing civilizations before they could establish proper defenses. They had performed this same operation on hundreds of worlds, swooping in to capture populations for their slave markets while stripping planets of valuable resources. ZYX watched with academic interest as the Krextai fleet approached the human outer colonies. This would provide valuable data on human defensive capabilities and their response to existential threats. The observer expected to witness either a swift surrender followed by mass enslavement, or a desperate but futile resistance that would end in the same result. The first human outpost the Krextai encountered was a mining station orbiting a gas giant. The facility housed roughly 2,000 workers and their families. Standard Krextai protocol involved a show of overwhelming force, a demand for surrender, and then the systematic processing of the population into slave categories. The mining station's response was immediate and unexpected. Instead of surrender or desperate pleas for mercy, the humans broadcast a single message across all frequencies. You have 30 seconds to leave our system before we consider you a hostile force. The Krextai commander, a veteran of countless successful raids, laughed at the audacity. His fleet possessed firepower capable of glassing entire continents, while the humans had what appeared to be converted cargo vessels with hastily mounted weapons. 29 seconds later, the human response began. What ZYX witnessed defied everything he knew about space combat. The human mining station didn't just fight back. It unleashed a coordinated assault that suggested months of preparation. Hidden weapon platforms throughout the asteroid field activated simultaneously, revealing that the humans had been expecting this kind of encounter. But the weapons themselves were unlike anything in ZYX's extensive database. Instead of energy beams or plasma projectiles, the humans used kinetic weapons that accelerated chunks of metal to significant fractions of light speed. The crude but effective railguns turned asteroids into projectiles, creating a devastating field of destruction that caught the Krextai fleet completely off guard. 3 Krextai vessels were destroyed in the first volley. The survivors found themselves facing an enemy that didn't fight according to any established tactical doctrine. Where other species would attempt to disable ships and preserve life, the humans seemed focused on complete annihilation. The mining station itself launched a dozen small craft that moved with suicidal determination toward the largest Krextai vessels. ZYX realized with growing horror that these weren't military ships at all, but civilian transports converted into improvised weapons platforms. The humans were turning their own people into guided missiles. The first human kamikaze strike hit the Krextai flagship with the force of a small nuclear weapon. ZYX sensors registered the explosion as the converted transport vessel, loaded with what appeared to be their own mining explosives, punched through the raider's shields and detonated inside the hull. The Krextai commander's confident laughter died, along with 3,000 of his crew members. But this was only the beginning of humanity's response. As the initial skirmish unfolded around the mining station, ZYX detected massive movement throughout the Sol system. Every human settlement, from the smallest research outpost to their largest colonies, was mobilizing with terrifying efficiency. What disturbed the Velthari observer most was the speed of their coordination. Most species required hours or even days to mount a system-wide defense. The humans had transitioned from peaceful mining operations to total warfare in less than 30 minutes. The Krextai fleet, now reduced to 8 cruisers and 23 smaller vessels, regrouped and attempted to press their attack. Their commander, Vraktel the Ruthless, had earned his reputation by adapting quickly to unexpected resistance. He ordered his ships to spread out and target human civilian centers, hoping to force a surrender through terror tactics. The strategy had worked on dozens of other worlds. Faced with the annihilation of their population centers, most species would negotiate for the survival of their civilians. The Krextai would accept tribute, slaves, and resources in exchange for sparing the majority of the population. Humanity's response shattered this expectation completely. Instead of desperate surrender negotiations, every human colony began broadcasting the same message. They chose to make this a war of extinction. So be it. ZYX watched in fascination and growing dread as the human colonies activated defense systems that shouldn't have existed. These weren't recently constructed fortifications, but carefully planned installations that had been built into the very foundations of their settlements. The colony on Europa revealed weapon emplacements that had been disguised as geological survey equipment. The research station on Titan deployed what appeared to be a massive electromagnetic pulse generator that disabled 2 Krextai vessels before they could adjust their shielding. But the most shocking revelation came from the human homeworld itself. Earth's response was not defensive. Instead, the planet began launching vessels at a rate that suggested every available ship had been pressed into military service. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, research vessels, and even ancient chemical propulsion craft from their early space program were being equipped with weapons and sent toward the battle zone. The humans were committing their entire civilization to this fight. Vraktel, realizing that his standard intimidation tactics were failing, ordered his fleet to target Earth's major population centers. If he could threaten their homeworld directly, surely these mad creatures would see reason. The first Krextai bombardment struck a human city with enough energy to level several square kilometers. The attack killed over 1 million humans instantly. The aftermath of this bombardment provided ZYX with the most terrifying display of human nature he would ever witness. Instead of surrendering, instead of pleading for mercy, instead of showing any rational response to such devastating losses, humanity's reaction was to escalate beyond all reason. Every human vessel in the system immediately changed course toward the Krextai fleet. Not just military ships, but civilian transports loaded with families, research stations that detached from their moorings, and even generation ships that had been preparing for deep space missions. The humans were committing species-wide suicide to ensure their enemy's destruction. But they weren't dying quietly. The converted civilian ships began detonating their fusion reactors in coordinated strikes against Krextai vessels. Each explosion was equivalent to a small star going supernova, and the humans were using their own people as the delivery system. What kind of species chooses mutual annihilation over surrender? ZYX Thorak whispered to himself, his recording equipment struggling to process the unprecedented violence. The answer came through intercepted human communications. Unlike other species that centralize their military command, the humans seemed to operate on a distributed decision-making system. Individual ships, individual stations, even individual humans were making the choice to sacrifice themselves without waiting for orders from central authority. They were a species where every member was willing to die rather than submit. As the battle escalated, ZYX Thorak began to understand why the Galactic Council had been concerned about humanity's potential. This wasn't a species that could be conquered through traditional means. They couldn't be intimidated, they couldn't be reasoned with, and they apparently couldn't be defeated without destroying them completely. The Krextai fleet, which had successfully enslaved dozens of civilizations, found themselves facing an enemy that treated warfare as a form of existential expression. Every human death seemed to fuel their remaining forces with greater fury rather than diminishing their resolve. By the end of the second day, Vractel's mighty raiding fleet had been reduced to 3 functioning vessels. The humans had lost over half their space-based infrastructure and millions of lives. Neither side was showing any sign of stopping. The third day of the conflict brought revelations that forced ZYX Thorak to question everything he understood about warfare and civilization. The remaining Krextai vessels, battered and desperate, attempted to withdraw from the Sol system. Commander Vractel, his once mighty fleet reduced to barely functional remnants, sent out standard retreat signals, expecting the humans to allow their departure in exchange for an end to hostilities. The humans ignored the retreat entirely. What followed was a pursuit unlike anything recorded in galactic military history. The humans didn't simply chase the fleeing Krextai ships. They hunted them with methodical precision that suggested a fundamental shift in their approach to warfare. The converted civilian vessels that had survived the initial engagements began working in coordinated groups, using their superior knowledge of the Sol system to predict and intercept the Krextai escape routes. The humans had turned their entire star system into a trap, and they were systematically closing every possible exit. But what truly disturbed ZYX Thorak was the change in human behavior itself. The initial desperate fury had evolved into something far more dangerous: cold, calculating determination. The pursuing human ships began broadcasting messages to the fleeing Krextai forces. These weren't demands for surrender or threats of destruction. Instead, the humans were explaining, in precise detail, exactly how they planned to kill every single Krextai in the system. "You brought 12 ships," one human captain transmitted. "We have identified and targeted 847 individual Krextai life signs. We will account for each one." The systematic nature of this promise was more terrifying than any battle cry. ZYX Thorak watched as the humans demonstrated capabilities that their initial technology assessment had completely missed. The primitive nuclear propulsion systems that had seemed so crude were actually incredibly robust and reliable. While Krextai vessels suffered system failures under the stress of extended combat, human ships continued operating with mechanical persistence. Their weapons, initially dismissed as inefficient kinetic systems, proved devastatingly effective in sustained engagements. The humans had apparently calculated that while energy weapons required complex power management and cooling systems, simple railguns could fire continuously as long as they had ammunition and power. The ammunition problem was solved in a typically human fashion. They were using debris from their own destroyed ships and stations as projectiles. Every piece of wreckage became a weapon. Every fallen human vessel was immediately stripped for materials by the survivors. The humans had turned their own losses into additional firepower. As the pursuit continued, HFY began receiving automated data transmissions from human sources throughout the system. At first, he assumed these were random communications spillover from their military coordination. But careful analysis revealed something far more significant. The humans were deliberately broadcasting their activities to anyone listening. They wanted witnesses. The transmissions included detailed tactical analyses, casualty reports, and strategic assessments of their own performance. The humans weren't just fighting a war. They were creating a comprehensive record of their capabilities for the galaxy to observe. Attention, unknown observers. One transmission began, clearly directed toward HFY's concealed position. We are aware of your monitoring activities. You are welcome to continue recording. We want the galaxy to understand what happens to those who attempt to enslave humanity. The casual acknowledgement of his presence sent chills through HFY's exoskeleton. The humans had known about his observation vessel from the beginning and had chosen to let him document their response to the Krextai attack. They were sending a message to the entire galaxy. The final Krextai vessel, carrying the wounded Commander Vractel and perhaps 300 survivors, made a desperate attempt to reach the edge of the system where their faster-than-light drives could engage. The ship was severely damaged, leaking atmosphere and running on backup power systems. Any reasonable military force would have allowed the crippled vessel to escape, satisfied with their overwhelming victory. The Krextai threat had been eliminated, and further pursuit would serve no strategic purpose. Humanity was not reasonable. 17 human ships, all that remained of their once thriving space fleet, converged on the fleeing Krextai vessel with absolute determination. But instead of simply destroying the ship, the humans did something that violated every convention of civilized warfare. They boarded it. The assault was conducted with precision that revealed extensive preparation for this exact scenario. The humans had apparently studied Krextai ship designs, atmospheric requirements, and even biological vulnerabilities. They knew exactly how to breach the hull, neutralize the defenders, and take control of the vessel. Commander Vractel's final transmission was broadcast throughout the system. What are you? What kind of species fights like this? The human response, delivered by a voice calm with exhaustion and determination, provided HFY with the answer that would haunt his reports for decades to come. We are the species you chose to make your enemy. We're the species that doesn't forget. We're the species that doesn't forgive. And now you're going to help us make sure this never happens to anyone else. The Krextai commander's screams echoed across the communications channels as the humans began extracting information about other Krextai operations, slave markets, and raiding targets throughout the galaxy. HFY realized with growing horror that humanity's war was just beginning 6 months after the destruction of the Krextai raiding fleet. HFY received new orders from the Galactic Council. His initial report on human capabilities had caused such alarm among the council members that they demanded continuous monitoring of the Sol system. What the council feared, and what HFY was beginning to understand, was that humanity's response to the Krextai attack was not an isolated incident of desperate defense. It was a declaration of war against an entire way of life in the galaxy. The information extracted from the captured Krextai had provided humanity with detailed intelligence about the slaving operations that plagued dozens of star systems. The humans had learned about established trade routes, slave markets, and the network of species that either participated in or tolerated the systematic exploitation of developing civilizations. Rather than reporting this information to the Galactic Council or attempting diplomatic solutions, the humans had chosen a different path entirely. They were going to eliminate the slavers themselves. The first sign of humanity's expanding operations came from the Kepler 442 system, where a Krextai slave processing facility had operated for over 2 decades. The facility processed captured populations from recently conquered worlds, sorting them by physical capabilities and selling them to various galactic markets. The human attack on the facility demonstrated tactical evolution that terrified ZYXRAC. Gone was the desperate fury of their initial defense. This was calculated warfare conducted by a species that had learned from their first encounter and adapted with frightening efficiency. The humans had somehow acquired faster-than-light capability that rivaled established galactic powers. Their ships materialized at the edge of the Kepler 442 system without triggering any of the early warning systems that protected the slave facility. But more disturbing than their improved technology was their strategic approach. The humans didn't simply attack the facility. They systematically documented every aspect of the operation before beginning their assault. They recorded the conditions of the enslaved populations, identified the species involved in running the facility, and cataloged the buyers who regularly purchased slaves from the market. Then, they broadcast everything across galactic communication networks. The galaxy was forced to watch as the humans liberated over 50,000 enslaved beings from dozens of different species. The footage showed the conditions these beings had endured, the casual brutality of their captors, and the systematic nature of the slavery operations that the Galactic Council had allowed to continue through bureaucratic inaction. The liberation itself was conducted with precision that suggested extensive planning. Human forces moved through the facility with detailed knowledge of its layout, security systems, and personnel. They had spent months preparing for this operation, studying every aspect of the target before striking. The enslaved populations were evacuated to ships that appeared designed specifically for refugee transport and medical care. The humans had anticipated the physical and psychological trauma these beings would have suffered and had prepared appropriate support systems. The slavers themselves received no such consideration. The humans executed every individual involved in the operation, not in combat, not in self-defense, but as systematic elimination of what they classified as crimes against sapient life. They broadcast these executions alongside the evidence of the slavers' activities, creating a galactic record of both the crimes and their consequences. The message was unmistakable. This is what happens to those who trade in suffering. Within days of the Kepler 442 liberation, similar operations began throughout the galaxy. Human ships appeared at slave markets, processing facilities, and transportation routes with increasing frequency. Each operation was documented and broadcast, building a comprehensive record of the slavery networks that had operated in the shadows of galactic civilization. The Galactic Council's response was immediate and predictable. They condemned human actions as vigilantism, demanded immediate cessation of unauthorized military operations, and threatened sanctions against the Sol system. Humanity's reply was delivered by someone who identified herself simply as Admiral Chun of the Human Liberation Fleet. We formally withdraw from any consideration for Galactic Council membership. We reject the Council's authority over human activities. We consider any attempt to interfere with liberation operations as material support for slavery, and will respond accordingly. The implications of this declaration sent shockwaves through established galactic powers. Humanity had declared independence from the galactic order itself and established their own moral authority for their actions. But the most terrifying aspect of humanity's campaign was their approach to intelligence gathering. Every liberated slave facility provided information about other operations. Every captured slaver was interrogated for details about their networks. Every freed being who chose to share information added to humanity's growing database of galactic slavery operations. The humans were building a comprehensive map of every species, organization, and individual involved in the slave trade throughout the galaxy. ZYXRAC's analysis of human communication intercepts revealed the scope of their plans. This wasn't a limited military campaign or a temporary response to the Krextai attack. The humans were conducting what they call the Great Liberation, a systematic campaign to eliminate slavery from the entire galaxy. They had appointed themselves the guardians of sapient rights everywhere. The most disturbing discovery came when ZYX analyzed the pattern of human operations. The liberated beings weren't simply returned to their home worlds. Many of those worlds had been the source of the enslaved populations in the first place, either unable or unwilling to protect their own people. Instead, humanity was offering citizenship and protection to anyone who wanted it. They were building a multi-species civilization under human protection, governed by what they called universal sapient rights. The galaxy was witnessing the birth of a new power that rejected the established order entirely and was actively recruiting from the populations that existing governments had failed to protect. ZYX realized that his observations were documenting more than a military campaign. He was witnessing the emergence of a civilization that would challenge everything the galaxy had accepted as normal 2 years after the initial Krextai attack. ZYX filed his final report on humanity to the Galactic Council. The document that would eventually reshape galactic politics began with a simple admission. Everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare, diplomacy, and civilization had been proven wrong by a single species that refused to accept the established order. The Human Liberation Fleet had grown from the 17 surviving ships of their desperate defense into a multi-species armada spanning hundreds of systems. The humans had accomplished this expansion not through conquest or intimidation, but by offering something no established galactic power had ever provided: genuine protection for the vulnerable. Every species that had suffered under slavery, every population that had been abandoned by the Galactic Council's bureaucratic processes, every civilization that had been dismissed as too small or insignificant to matter, they had found sanctuary under human protection. The Sol system itself had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Earth's orbital infrastructure now included massive habitats designed for dozens of different atmospheric and gravitational requirements. The humans had created a truly multi-species home world where beings from across the galaxy lived under a single principle: the absolute rejection of slavery in any form. But what made the human expansion truly revolutionary was their approach to governance. Unlike the Galactic Council's complex hierarchies and bureaucratic processes, human protected space operated under what they called direct action principles. Any threat to sapient rights was met with immediate response. Any call for help received priority attention, and any attempt to reinstate slavery was eliminated without negotiation. The galaxy had learned to fear the phrase "human response incoming." ZYX final observations focused on a single incident that exemplified everything humanity had become. The Zephyrian Empire, a major galactic power with significant influence in the Council, had decided to test human resolve by reinstating slavery in their border systems. The Zephyrians calculated that humanity couldn't respond to every injustice in the galaxy, and that their established military power would deter human interference. The human response lasted exactly 72 hours. The Human Liberation Fleet materialized throughout Zephyrian space simultaneously, not just at border systems or military installations, but at every single location where slavery existed within their empire. The coordination required for such an operation defied conventional strategic thinking. The humans had somehow monitored, cataloged, and planned responses to slavery operations across hundreds of systems within a power that spanned thousands of star systems. Their intelligence network had achieved penetration that made the Zephyrian Empire's own security services look primitive by comparison. But the most shocking aspect of the operation was its restraint. The humans didn't attack Zephyrian military forces. They didn't target government installations. They didn't attempt to conquer territory or impose their own governance. They simply liberated every enslaved being in the Empire and left. The Zephyrian military, mobilized to defend against human invasion, found themselves with nothing to fight. Human forces had completed their objectives and withdrawn before the Empire could mount any effective response. The only lasting evidence of human presence was the complete absence of slavery throughout Zephyrian space, and a simple message broadcast from every former slave facility. Slavery is now extinct in this region. Any attempt to restart these operations will result in immediate human response. This is not a negotiation. The psychological impact on the Zephyrian Empire was devastating. Their military power, their established authority, their entire governmental system had been rendered irrelevant by an enemy that treated their defenses as minor inconveniences. Within months, the Zephyrian Empire formally banned slavery throughout their space and requested human assistance in establishing rehabilitation programs for their liberated populations. The message to the galaxy was clear. Resistance to human principles was futile, but cooperation was welcomed. ZYXRAC's final analysis concluded with observations that would haunt galactic politics for centuries. Humanity had demonstrated that established power meant nothing when confronted by absolute moral conviction backed by unlimited tactical adaptability. They had shown that a single species, operating from pure principles rather than political calculation, could reshape galactic civilization through direct action. But perhaps most significantly, they had proven that the galaxy's acceptance of slavery as an unfortunate but inevitable aspect of interspecies relations was nothing more than collective moral cowardice. The humans had looked at systematic suffering that the galaxy had tolerated for millennia and decided it was unacceptable. Then they had made it stop. As ZYXRAC transmitted his final report to the Galactic Council, he included a personal addendum that would be classified for decades. I have observed humanity for over 2 years. I have witnessed them transform from a primitive species struggling to survive into the most significant moral force in galactic history. They have not conquered worlds or established empires. They have done something far more dangerous. They have demonstrated that the galaxy's problems can be solved if someone simply decides to solve them. Every enslaved being in the galaxy now knows that help exists. Every slaver knows that they are being hunted. Every government knows that their authority means nothing if they use it to permit suffering they could prevent. Humanity has not just unleashed their wrath on their enemies. They have unleashed hope on the entire galaxy. ZYXRAC had served aboard the Galactic Council's observation vessels for over 3 decades, documenting the rise and fall of countless species across the galaxy. The Velthari observer had witnessed civilizations bloom into spacefaring empires and others crumble under their own ambitions. But nothing in his extensive career had prepared him for what he would observe in the Sol system. The assignment seemed routine enough. A newly discovered species called humans had just achieved faster-than-light travel through some primitive fusion drive system. The Council needed a comprehensive report on their technological capabilities, social structures, and potential threat assessment. Standard procedure for any species that managed to break free from their home system. ZYXRAC positioned his cloaked research vessel at the edge of the asteroid belt, well within scanning range but invisible to the humans' crude detection systems. His initial observations were underwhelming. The humans had established a few colonies on nearby planets and moons, nothing impressive by galactic standards. Their ships were bulky, inefficient, and relied on what appeared to be nuclear propulsion systems that the galaxy had abandoned millennia ago. Fascinating primitive creatures, he recorded in his daily log. They appear to have achieved space travel through brute force rather than elegant engineering. Their vessels are essentially flying bombs held together by metal plating and stubborn determination. The human homeworld, Earth, buzzed with activity. Massive industrial complexes dotted the continents, and their orbital infrastructure was expanding rapidly. What caught ZYXRAC's attention was not their technology, but their behavior. Unlike most species that became cautious and diplomatic upon reaching the stars, humans seemed to approach space with the same aggressive curiosity they applied to everything else. They established mining operations on asteroids with reckless abandon, sending crews into dangerous sectors that seasoned spacefaring races would avoid. Their colonization efforts were equally bold, terraforming hostile worlds that other species would simply abandon. It was impressive in its own crude way, but hardly threatening to the established galactic order. That changed 3 months into the HFY observation period. A Krextai raiding fleet consisting of 12 heavy cruisers and over 30 smaller vessels entered the Sol system. The Krextai were known throughout the galaxy as ruthless slavers and pirates, preying on developing civilizations before they could establish proper defenses. They had performed this same operation on hundreds of worlds, swooping in to capture populations for their slave markets while stripping planets of valuable resources. HFY watched with academic interest as the Krextai fleet approached the human outer colonies. This would provide valuable data on human defensive capabilities and their response to existential threats. The observer expected to witness either a swift surrender followed by mass enslavement, or a desperate but futile resistance that would end in the same result. The first human outpost the Krextai encountered was a mining station orbiting a gas giant. The facility housed roughly 2,000 workers and their families. Standard Krextai protocol involved a show of overwhelming force, a demand for surrender, and then the systematic processing of the population into slave categories. The mining station's response was immediate and unexpected. Instead of surrender or desperate pleas for mercy, the humans broadcast a single message across all frequencies. You have 30 seconds to leave our system before we consider you a hostile force. The Krextai commander, a veteran of countless successful raids, laughed at the audacity. His fleet possessed firepower capable of glassing entire continents, while the humans had what appeared to be converted cargo vessels with hastily mounted weapons. 29 seconds later, the human response began. What HFY witnessed defied everything he knew about space combat. The human mining station didn't just fight back. It unleashed a coordinated assault that suggested months of preparation. Hidden weapon platforms throughout the asteroid field activated simultaneously, revealing that the humans had been expecting this kind of encounter. But the weapons themselves were unlike anything in HFY's extensive database. Instead of energy beams or plasma projectiles, the humans used kinetic weapons that accelerated chunks of metal to significant fractions of light speed. The crude but effective railguns turned asteroids into projectiles, creating a devastating field of destruction that caught the Krextai fleet completely off guard. 3 Krextai vessels were destroyed in the first volley. The survivors found themselves facing an enemy that didn't fight according to any established tactical doctrine. Where other species would attempt to disable ships and preserve life, the humans seemed focused on complete annihilation. The mining station itself launched a dozen small craft that moved with suicidal determination toward the largest Krextai vessels. HFY realized with growing horror that these weren't military ships at all, but civilian transports converted into improvised weapons platforms. The humans were turning their own people into guided missiles.